not determined that the land needs to be kept permanently open. It's the application of these questions in the table that's then followed in the annex to do that.
Again, just to confirm the point, I mean, page 79 of the addendum asks the questions that you've just referred to. And when one looks at the column on assessment evidence, one has a series of documents mentioned there, including the North Yorkshire and York Landscape Character Project, and there's nature conservation designations mentioned there as well. Now, just to deal with this point that was raised at the last sessions, that obviously the green belt is not a landscape designation in itself, and nature conservation designations do not necessarily mean that land needs to be kept open applying this criterion. The mention of these documents in the list of assessment evidence, how should one take that? Are you using those to determine whether land should necessarily remain open because it's a nature conservation designation or because it's a particular quality of landscape?
No. In short, but the approach is based on following through questions 5.1, 5.2 and 5.3, and as with all the evidence-based sources, those documents will be looked at to see if there's information that is, or analysis that is relevant to answering those detailed assessment questions, but none of those documents in themselves give you an approach to determining the boundary. You have to apply the methodology and take those into account.
Okay. Next theme, please. You may not want to say a great deal about this given the debate that's taken place on earlier days at the examination, but there's a broad theme that, well, freestanding settlements such as those proposed to be allocated in this plan are less sustainable. They'll impact more on the green belt and its openness. Therefore, the approach taken by the council isn't justified, and that's reflected in the methodology that's been adopted. Again, what view do you take about those contentions, please?
I'll try not to avoid the comments I made on Monday, but in terms of looking at all three purposes of sustainable development and the environmental dimension being particularly important to York, but really how then the historic character and setting and special qualities of the city are a fundamental consideration in identifying whether the different options around sort of peripheral expansion or freestanding settlements. They are key things that needed to be taken into account both through this Greenbelt boundary setting methodology, but particularly through the wider processes of the local plan. So we've been looking at the wider approach as appraise the potential sites. We touched on the sort of site selection methodology and the sustainability objectives, 14 and 15, that link across to Purpose 4, and also how heritage impact appraisals have provided the detail criteria through which those sites have been looked at. So again, you get this sort of interplay between the site selection and the spatial strategy and the Greenbelt approach in terms of using that evidence about the historic character and setting of the city, and all of that context informing the decisions about the strategic site locations.
Thank you very much. And I think in previous sessions of the inquiry, there's been reference made to Historic England's position as the plan was being developed and its influence on the spatial strategy. Again, can you just sort of confirm what you understand the position to be and how that's relevant to dealing with these criticisms of the council's approach, please?
Well, I guess we've referred quite a bit on Monday to PM 55 in terms of the approach, the explanation of the spatial strategy. That has very much come from the liaison and input from Historic England. I think Historic England have been very supportive, but were very supportive and were involved with the production of the heritage topic paper, which was very much about trying to give this broader based understanding of the special qualities and characteristics of the city. So they've been supportive of that and supportive of use of the principal characteristics that have been applied in the methodology. And then that's then fed through in terms of the input in terms of view that in terms of peripheral development on the edge of the city had the potential to undermine the special qualities and character of the city, and then actually an approach that did focus on the urban area, but an approach of actually bringing in the freestanding settlements would have less impact on those special qualities in the character and setting.
Sorry, just for your note, page 89 of the addendum, paragraph 9.24, quotes the Historic England response to the publication draft consultation. So we welcome the intention to limit the amount of growth which is proposed around the periphery of the built-up areas will help to safeguard a number of key elements identified in the heritage topic paper that Mr. Wood mentioned as contributing to the special character and setting of the historic city. And they reference there the compact nature of views towards the city from the ring road in relationship to surrounding settlements. I'll come back to that a little bit later, but they reference paragraph 9.24 on page 89, sir. Right, next theme, please. There are different points raised by other objectors, but there's a broad allocation that the approach is a retrofit to justify decisions that were reached under the old methodology. Having reviewed the methodology, Mr. Wooden, with your knowledge of the way that the annex work has been done, what position do you take?
Well, the position I take on that is that the methodology has been reviewed to address the inspector's concerns. The assessment of land and the determination of the boundaries has followed the approach set out in the methodology. So there's some ways, the point where there is no real change is that it uses the same evidence base with no new studies or evidence being introduced. It is a clarified and a revised approach, but an approach has been worked through, and that's why it has taken the time it has taken, and why the annexes have been set out, and that methodology has been applied and worked through, and the results of the exercise are as a result of the methodology application and that further work that's been undertaken, rather than just fitting it back to what was already prepared.
Thank you. On a similar theme, I think there's at least one allegation that the evidence base is outdated now, it's too old again. Do you accept that? I accept that there's a range of evidence-based documents here, and we go back to the 2003 Greenbelt appraisal, there's the 2014 Heritage topic paper. Yes, the evidence, things have moved on, but I think in terms of the sort of nature of those evidence-based studies, and if you think about, I guess, the length of history of the city and its characteristics, and the issue around historic character and setting, I don't accept that those studies that were comprehensively undertaken are out of date. I think particularly the sort of heritage topic paper gave a broader based assessment than had been done in the Greenbelt appraisal work. So I don't accept that is out of date, and I would make the point really that provides the key evidence that is required to undertake the assessment work. Others assess that what we've done is essentially a sort of fundamentally different approach with different outcomes to the original assessment. Again, what's your position on that allegation?
It's not a fundamentally different approach. The approach uses the same evidence base and studies, but it is a much clearer approach in terms of how that evidence-based work and how that assessment work has been undertaken with much clearer and better explained results that relate much clearer to Greenbelt purposes. So I don't accept that it is fundamentally different. I accept that it is different because it needed to be revised and clarified to address the inspector's concerns.
Just a couple of final points, please. Perhaps should have raised this earlier, but I think there's an allegation in relation to villages and other settlements that somehow Purpose 4 has been stretched from the preservation of the setting and special character of York to be applied inappropriately to villages and other settlements. Just explain how Purpose 4 has been applied and the extent to which you think it is relevant when looking at the villages and other settlements.
Yeah, I think we picked up on inspectors' previous concerns as related to this, which did tie across to Purpose 2 previously, and we've accepted that Purpose 2 didn't apply. And it is sort of inspectors' comments that, and I appreciate not saying that there were, but where there were issues related to the individual identity of smaller settlements and villages, if this was important to the setting and special character of York, this should be addressed under Purpose 4. I appreciate we weren't being told to do that. We're just saying if that is the case, then that's where you would look at it. So our position is that that is the case, and we draw on the heritage topic paper that in terms of setting out its understanding of York's historic character and setting, that the shape, form and the compactness of surrounding villages and their identity is an important part of the overall settlement pattern of York, which brings in not just the main urban area of York, but as I think was described on Monday as the clock face of settlements around the city. It's that overall settlement pattern that needs to be taken into account. So if there are issues of that were identified or assessed of coalescence or sort of loss of compactness, they were considered under Purpose 4.
Thank you. And finally, doesn't necessarily fit in, I think, with the suite of questions. It's 7.1 in particular, but there is a theme raised by a few objectors about the need for safeguarded land to be identified. Your response, please.
Thank you. Yes, I think a number of points which probably are similar to the discussion that we had at the previous hearings. Clearly, I won't just rely on that. So I guess we start with the NPPF. So paragraph 85 states that where necessary, identify areas of safeguarded land. So there isn't a requirement to identify safeguarded land. And also we draw, in terms of methodology and the approach, we draw on RSS, the Saved RSS policy, YH9C, and the key requirement there alongside the NPPF requirement that boundaries endure beyond the plan period. It's sort of factual evidence that options for safeguarded land were considered at previous stages of the plan making process, but I think it was without necessarily being involved in this exercise that this was undertaken in 2016, that approach, the preferred sites consultation, wasn't taken forward. And really, it was, I guess, a little bit like the discussion we had on the spatial strategy, where I was describing how we were really trying to by identifying strategic sites, to try and take a more precise approach. I think there's a sort of similar principle here, that there's really additional land really that forms part of the strategic site allocations, with several of those having build-out times that extend beyond the plan period. So there's in effect headroom to meet needs within those strategic site allocations. And really the Council's view is that this really creates more certainty and allows for a more comprehensive place shaping approach and a master planning, creating sustainable communities in the longer run, that more certainty of really embodying the approach in terms of being able to endure beyond the plan period by making use of the strategic sites is a better way forward of addressing what we need to do beyond the plan period.
Thank you.
Sorry, my apologies. So the need to set greenbelt boundaries that are capable of enduring. Does that mean that you need to preempt the need for land beyond this plan period?
I think the approach that's been taken is, if you are intending to create greenbelt boundaries that are permanent because they'll endure beyond the end of the plan period, that it is legitimate to take into account how you would provide for needs extending beyond the plan period, and to set greenbelt boundaries accordingly. If you're asking how you're going to achieve permanence beyond the greenbelt period, that must, in our view, involve some assessment of how development needs may need to be addressed after the end of the planned period, because that must feed into the question of the permanence of the boundaries. To put it another way, if you don't do that at this stage, the risk is that you are in a situation where the greenbelt boundaries are not meeting needs beyond the end of the planned period, so you need to anticipate those now as best you can. Thank you, sir. Just for your reference, the approach to safeguarded land, page 98 of the addendum, paragraph 10.33 on deals with safeguarded land in general terms. So I think those were at least some of the main themes. I'm sure there'll be other points that are raised by other parties as we go around the table, but hopefully that was a not too lengthy introduction to the issues.
Yeah, that was very helpful, thank you. So what I'm going to do now is take a break and then invite others to join in. So it's now 11:01. I adjourn the hearing to resume at 11:20. Thank you.